views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open, the one and only show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world right to you. I'm your host, Daren, Jaime, and today we're going to update you on what's happening in and around our borough, as well as across New York City. Coming up on our show, we will talk with New York State Senator of the 36th Senatorial District, Jamaal T. Bailey, on the legislation that's geared towards reforming the police and addressing criminal justice issues brought up across the country. Then also, we'll meet a candidate for Congress in District 16, Jamaal Bowman. He'll talk about what issues and actions he plans on tackling in the district. And then a little bit later on in the show, we're going to talk about doulas and how doulas are providing physical and emotional support to mothers during childbirth during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then later, the new realities and challenges faced through the pandemic. It's important that individuals look after their mental and physical health. We'll give you some more details a little bit later on in the show. And then after that, we're going to speak with an author on how her book highlights emotional healing of her experiences from sexual and physical abuse. And then finally, we're going to meet a not-for-profit that's committed to providing low or no-cost meals to New York City families in need. So stay tuned because all this and much more is heading your way. Right now, we're officially open. And hello, everyone. I'm Daren Jaime, and today is Wednesday, June 24th, and you're watching Open, a live and interactive program bringing the New York and the Bronx straight to your TV sets. We want to thank you for watching, and we encourage you to stay connected to us. How do you do that? Well, you can watch us every week here on BronxNet's Channel 67, also Verizon Fios, that would be Channel 33, or anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. We also want to thank our viewers who are watching on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, as Open is broadcast live simultaneously on MNN's channels. And so always you can stay connected to us via social media as well on BronxNet TV on all of our social media platforms. Well, a lot has certainly been going on through the course of this past week. We'll take you to a few things with our Bronx updates. Well, starting off, New York City has officially entered into phase 2 of the COVID-19 recovery efforts. New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo informed there was, quote, less than 1% of COVID-19 tests conducted in the state that turned out positive, which means that we can continue to be on the right path towards defeating the virus. Now, the second phase of reopening will include outdoor dining, offices, in-store retail, hair salons, and barbershops, real estate services, houses of worship, as well as car sales and rentals, all with social distancing as well as hygiene standards being met. Meanwhile, New York State Senator Brad Hoyleyman is reassessing his bill to let restaurants and bars offer takeout wine, beer, and cocktails 2 years after the coronavirus shutdown order ends, and suggesting the Governor Cuomo look into stopping the to-go booze before that. The decision comes after reports of New Yorkers flocking to the streets outside of city restaurants, despite bans on in-person dining and rules about social distancing. Senator Hoyleyman says, quote, my bill was meant to be a lifeline for restaurants and bars facing extinction because of COVID-19, not an opportunity for these establishments to totally disregard open container laws and social distancing requirements. Well, in other news, the residents of McKinley houses received food relief recently from volunteers from the Southeast Neighborhood Centers. Our BronxNet reporter Arlene Makoko was there, and she brings us the story right now.
It's a community still reeling from the difficulties brought on by COVID-19.
And nice people in the housing, okay?
Awesome.
And beautiful, yeah.
Quarantined for weeks now, Carlos Santos, whose health is already fragile due to a heart operation, arrived without a mask and was quickly provided one by volunteers, along with this packet he's holding that has more.
The community's going through a lot. Everybody's going through a lot.
An after-school counselor with the Southeast Bronx Neighborhood Centers at PS 140 on Eagle Avenue, Malcolm Hawthorne, would before COVID-19 struck in mid-March be preparing to help fifth graders with their homework. Now that role has shifted to where he is today, providing not only the parents of his students with food relief, but also their neighbors.
Well, we know that McKinley, we know that Forest, we know that Hartchester and other locations, Castle Hill, those other locations still need communities, members to come in and also be involved with them.
I came out here because I like my community, I love my job working with kids.
Rashad Piera is a second grade school counselor determined with others here to make a difference.
We've been out 150 so far.
That's Cheyenne Solomon sharing the number of boxes now with residents, hoping to alleviate short and long-term needs.
I feel like this is like something that we want to start and continue to build on.
So there are 650 boxes here and only 620 units, so they're trying to make sure that households can get more than one if they want. Here at the McKinley House is Arlene Makoko for BronxNet.
Thank you, Arlene. And that's all the time we have from our Bronx updates. We encourage you to stay connected with us here on Open. We're going to take a quick break and come right back right after this. And thank you for staying with us. In light of the police-involved death regarding George Floyd in Minneapolis, many people in the community were urging for reforms to hold law enforcement accountable as for their actions, as well as addressing police practices. And then the important law, 50A, which deals with police and misconduct and brutality. Well, the 50A law was signed into legislation by Governor Cuomo last week. We asked the question now, what provisions do these laws mean moving forward? Joining us now to give us more information and provide further insight is the New York State Senator of District 36, Jamaal T. Bailey. And Senator Bailey, good to have you.
Daren, it was a pleasure. I hope you and your family holding up well during this coronavirus, even as we enter phase 2. So,
yeah, we're holding up pretty good, and I hope you're holding up too good. And we're glad that we can still do some things virtually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's get at it. Listen, as we said, the governor signed into law 50A. We know that was a legislation that went up and down Albany. A lot of people have been talking about it for a minute. But first of all, give us your thoughts on 50A being signed into law.
Well, I'm excited. I was the sponsor of the bill, so it was my bill that we were able to get across the finish line. But I want to say thank you not just to the legislative leaders, Speaker Hasty and Leader Stewart-Cousins, and my colleagues in government, but most importantly to the mothers of the movement and the families and the people who let their voices be heard. And they let the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of atrocity be a clarion call to the country that no longer will we stand for this nonsense. No longer will we accept subhuman treatment. We will make it loud and clear that Black Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter, not just in protest and in policy. So I'm very excited that we've got this first step towards the right direction done in 58.
Yeah. And let me talk about public trust, because we know that there has been this huge fraction between police and community. Given the fact that you now have 50A in as law, do we find that this is going to be a community bridge? Because we've heard on the part of certain law enforcement, of course, this is not something that they're really going for.
Well, I remain hopeful that we can continue to strengthen the bonds between police and community. I am not an anti-police person or a legislator. I've never been that. And unfortunately, what happens when you try to do anything that relates to policing, people tend to muddy the waters and they try to say that you're trying to be or attempting to be anti-police. It couldn't be any further from the truth. So, Daren, as a lead sponsor of this legislation, I held 2 hearings last October, one in Albany and one in New York City, to ensure that I elicited conversation and comments from not just my side of the perspective, but law enforcement. And the resounding conversation, the resounding issue that law enforcement members had was an issue of privacy. That they said they didn't want their families' names, addresses, social security numbers, those things getting out in the public sphere. I agreed with them then, and I agree with them now. And that was something that we were able to put into the law, into the legislation. That while we repeal Section 50A, we were able to strengthen the FOIL. We were able to strengthen the public officers law around FOIL, meaning that these records, the personal records, has no business in the public sphere. Nobody has the right to go to harass or annoy or bother an officer or their family. I'm going to be very clear about that. But the original intent of the legislation back in 1976, Senator Frank Padovan, the legislation was intended to stop that type of harassment and annoyment, not to serve as a bar on disciplinary records. So it's just to understand where we've been to get where we're going.
Yeah. Let's walk through a little bit about 50A. I want to talk about the Office of Special Investigation within the Attorney General's office that allow for the impartial investigation of police misconduct in the state and across the city.
So that's a different bill. That's a special prosecutor bill. So we were able to pass a number of bills in the state legislature last year that the governor signed into law in the last week or 10 days. And the special prosecutor bill is another bill that I've carried, and that relates to the investigation of unarmed killings. When law enforcement is involved in the killing of an unarmed individual. It also allows them to investigate if there is a question as to whether the individual, the decedent, as it were, was unarmed or not. So, like, there are a number of different bills that work in concert together. 58 was important. Special prosecutor. Another bill that I sponsored was the medical attention bill. Myself and Assemblymember Natalia Fernandez, the Andrew Kearse Act, as it were. Andrew was a Bronx man who was in police custody in Schenectady, and he was taken into custody, and he indicated multiple times that he couldn't breathe and that he was having significant concerns. And this was all captured on dash cam. And Mr. Kearse, unfortunately, died because of a heart attack. And so that law would require officers or law enforcement members that if somebody in custody is requesting medical care, that they have a duty to request. They don't have a duty to perform that necessarily, but they have a duty to ensure that they're calling for medical attention. So a lot of these bills work in concert together, and it's important that we got them done as a package, not just one-offs.
Well, Senator Bailey, thank you so much for being with us. We got to leave it there. Great legislation. I think a lot of people are going to be talking about this for some time to come. A landmark legislation here in the state of New York. Senator Jamaal Bailey, the sponsor of that. And we thank you so much for being with us here on Open.
Daren, thank you so much for everything that you do for us. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Senator Jamaal Bailey, our guest here on Open. Listen, stay with us. We do have more show coming up. We'll be right back right after this.
When taking public transportation, don't touch your phone. Carry hand sanitizer and use it immediately upon leaving the bus or train. Avoid touching your face. If someone is coughing or sneezing, move away. Wash your hands with soap and water as soon as possible. Limit contact with poles. If possible, avoid rush hour. Don't eat or drink on public transportation. Keep your bag off the floor or other surfaces. Avoid directly touching turnstiles. Stay up to date with the latest from your local health department and CDC.
Yesterday was the state's primary election. Our next guest is a candidate running for Congress in New York's District 16 in the Congressional District right here in the Bronx, as well as Westchester County. Our next guest is also a former Bronx Middle School principal who understands the struggles of those in the community and aims to fight for education, jobs, as well as Medicare, justice reforms, and much more. And joining us now to provide some information on his candidacy and why he's decided to seek this congressional seat in District 16 is none other than Jamaal Bowman. And Jamaal, good to have you with us.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, let's get right into it. I mean, obviously, you're a candidate for the race for District 16, a seat that's been occupied by Congressman Elliot Engel as the incumbent for so long. Why do you feel it's time for a change?
Well, not just me. Many people throughout the district from the very beginning told us it's time for a change. They consistently discussed how Congressman Engel is absent. He's not present. He's not engaged. He's not engaging the entire community and the entire district in the issues that matter most. Issues like housing, healthcare, jobs, education, environmental justice. Congressman Engel has not been a leader on any of those issues over the course of his career. In addition, he's been in office 31 years and he's lived in Maryland for 27 of those years, claiming his home in Maryland as his primary residence for over a decade. That's just unacceptable. My work in the community and my work in the district in particular has been in education for the last 10 years as a middle school principal. And when you're an educator, you understand intimately the issues that impact your kids the most. Kids can't thrive in school when they're dealing with food insecurity, housing insecurity, lack of job opportunities, and overall oppression under a government and policies that continue to not uplift but suppress what's going on in our community. So we felt it was time for a change. We got in a race with a lot of support, and so far we've gotten over 60 endorsements from grassroots organizations and people from across the country. So things are looking good right now.
So when you look at District 16, what do you find to be the primary issues that are affecting? I mean, you talked about education, and you also talked about justice. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at economic development and economic inequality across the district, it's incredibly stark. If we were a nation, we would have the eighth worst economic inequality in the world. In one part of the district, you have some of the highest real estate values in places like Scarsdale and Riverdale, but you also have the highest number of WIC recipients of any congressional district in the country. So we have to deal with issues of racial and economic inequality very directly. That comes in the form of jobs, job training programs, and job opportunities. That comes from investment in healthcare by hiring more nurses and investing in healthcare resources. That comes from investing in education, hiring more teachers, and building infrastructure around those areas. In addition to environmental justice, right now, with the COVID pandemic and everything that's happening across the country, it's a perfect opportunity to implement a Green New Deal where we will focus on building clean, renewable energy infrastructures in this district by tapping into the talent and unlimited potential of the people right here.
Unemployment is a big issue, and homelessness as well, particularly here in the borough of the Bronx. A lot of people contend with that. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, so we have a very aggressive plan to deal with the homelessness and housing epidemic, lack of affordable housing epidemic happening in the district. So we look to invest $1 trillion over the next 10 years to build 12 million new social housing units where the residents will have part ownership of their homes, their land, and the commercial real estate attached to it. This plan has been championed in Congress by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Elizabeth Warren also has a very bold plan for housing where she's looking to invest $500 billion in housing over the next 10 years, and also providing grants for home ownership. As we know, people of color have been kept out of the home ownership conversation for far too long. The New Deal built the middle class for white Americans, but it kept out people of color. We're looking to right the wrongs of the New Deal via a Green New Deal with a focus on housing and infrastructure there.
Yeah. You made an allegation earlier saying that the congressman has been absent. Give us a little bit about the absenteeism of the congressman that you're not pleased with.
Yeah, well, not just me, it's the people throughout the district. One example is during the pandemic. He wasn't in the district when the pandemic hit, and for 3 months after that. He also claimed that he was going to be in Co-op City and Mount Vernon giving out groceries to residents there while he was at his home in Maryland. And he was caught in that lie when a journalist knocked on his door in Maryland, and he answered it when he was supposed to be here in the district. So that's the frustration we've heard from people throughout the district from the very beginning, not just during the pandemic, but the pandemic revealed what everyone already knew. He's an absent congressman.
And your thoughts, because there's some people say, listen, if we lose that seat and that seat changes, his seniority and the things that are brought to the table, will it'll turn the clock back. So your thoughts on that, because you're running and you know what the possible potential risks are, but you feel a certain type of way about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, what has his seniority brought to the district? I mean, we need 70,000 affordable homes in our district as we speak. Our schools are underfunded by billions of dollars. We're dealing with environmental racism at the level where if you live in the Bronx, you're 3 times more likely to die of asthma than anywhere else in the country. I spoke about the economic and racial inequality. He's been there 31 years and he hasn't fought or led on any of these issues. So his seniority isn't bringing resources to the places in the district where it matters the most.
Finally, can you tell people how to get in touch with you if you're running for a district, congressional district 16?
Oh, absolutely. Please go to bowmanforcongress.com. You can learn more about us there.
Well, thank you, Jamaal. Bowman, congressional district, I should say 16, is the seat that he's seeking after the seat that's occupied currently by incumbent Eliot Engel on the Democratic line. Thank you so much for joining us here on Open.
Thank you, sir.
All righty. And we want you to stay connected to us right here. We've got more show coming up. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back right after this.
It looks bleak. It feels bleak. But the city isn't shut down because our public services keep working. In spite of, and in the face of, the dangers, we can count on them. And to keep them working and funded now and in the future, we need to be counted. Self-respond now to the 2020 census at my2020census.gov.
And thank you for staying with us. Doulas are an important part of the delivery care team. They provide physical, emotional, and informational support to a mother before, during, and after childbirth. Now, due to COVID-19, hospitals restricting patients to only one support person in the delivery room, also cutting off all other visitors in order to minimize the spread and the chance of contracting COVID. Well, what steps and actions are being taken right now to help doulas support and interact with patients? We're pleased to be joined by a very special guest, and we're pleased to have Dr. Amina Ali, and she is the founder and the lead advocate at the Federation of International Gender and Human Rights. She joins us as our guest here on Open. And Dr. Ali, good to have you.
Good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I do know that it is very challenging, especially in the hospital situation right now. As we said, with COVID and COVID restrictions, you only are allowed pretty much that person to come in. So talk to us a little bit about giving childbirth and how doulas have had to really make adjustments during this season.
Well, a lot of it has to do with personal care. The person-to-person contact, of course, with COVID is running the risk of mom contracting it, and then new baby with no immune system contracting the virus as well. Breast is best, and it has the greatest antigens and basic subsidies to build the milk, build the immune system, and build the immunity in the baby. So while baby's newborn, it really doesn't have anything for 28 days. So it's always best to treat the baby as though it has no immune system, similar to someone with cancer, someone that has a compromised immune system because of age or because of the understanding of a health disparity. So you always want to make sure that the person-to-person contact is limited. So the hospitals have put in very, very strong, very stringent rules and regulations as to who can go in and when they can go in. So that means who can go in, who is going to be the less viable to give or contract the virus. And then when they can go in, we can't have them in there all day, every day, going in and out, going back and forth. You have to either stay in there or leave. If you have to leave, they're going to ask you to redo your contamination procedures. And this is very key as a first responder and having women come into care while they were pregnant. This was very, very needed because women were saying that they were coming down with the virus and couldn't bond with their baby. So in the very, very beginnings, we were noticing the disparity in having the women be distant or maybe even wear a face mask with their newborn. So we realized we had to put other protocols in place and make sure that the babies are safe and mommy was healthy.
Right. And so talk to me about maternal health during this time. I mean, very important, very key, very critical. What kind of advice were you giving mothers for maternal health?
Yes. Well, first of all, we're educating them. As we know, COVID-19 is really COVID-2, back when we had SARS, if everybody remembers that. So we're understanding what the virus is, and SARS is COVID-2. So we're taking the mutated piece and we're trying to work variables around it. So we're trying to get the vaccine, we're trying to get standards of care, and of course, avoidance of the contact through washing the hands, through skin-to-skin contact, and then through face-to-face contact, which is why we're wearing face masks. The second measure we're doing is we're involving the people. We're not pushing the fear factor in this. We're making sure that you understand what you need to do. So that means keep your family healthy and well. Make sure that daddy and other siblings are well before birth. Don't wait until the birth and then try to invade them with vitamin C tablets. We need to make sure that their upkeep is going well. So mom has 10 months to have baby. So if she was pregnant within that COVID region, we're going to make sure that daddies are healthy, that parents are healthy, that siblings stay healthy, and that the contact is minimum with mommy so that it doesn't run the risk of them contracting it without knowing it and giving it to mommy. So we did a quasi-isolation thing where the children only had a few hours a day to be with mommy, and then we would separate them, and then we would get them used to mommy being away from the children, because mommy, when she has babies, she was going to be away from the children anyway, just for quarantine reasons. And that would have been the first 14 days of the baby's life. We're going to eliminate contact. We're going to eliminate too many visitors. We're not having any outside visitors. So whoever was there at the time that mommy gives birth is the only people that'll be allowed in her room. So that's why we put protocols in place. And then we asserted mommy's care. So, once we did the education, we did the instruction, we gave mommy care. So we made sure she had masks. If she contracted the virus, we made sure that if she got sick or ill in any way, that we helped with the symptoms so that baby can be skin to skin as quickly as possible, as soon as possible. And we also made sure that baby was well, making sure that if mommy had COVID when she was pregnant, that baby tested negative for COVID, and made sure that the parameters were in place to keep baby negative for COVID after baby was born.
Yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about racial disparities, because that was huge, right? We know that the racial disparities affecting African Americans during COVID, and particularly communities of color that suffered the most casualties and also are the most susceptible, the most vulnerable population. I know that you've done some work in testifying and being an advocate. I know in 2019, you are the representative for the International Model UN Association, and also a member to the International Human Rights Commission in Geneva. And so you do a lot of advocacy. Talk to us about being that voice, especially for the voiceless in a time like this.
Yeah, I was the squeaky wheel before COVID. I was the squeaky wheel when people were talking about job disparity and making sure pregnant women got a place to go back to work once she had the baby and that type thing. So I think my squeakiness is effective, ongoing. And when COVID hit, it was very, very passionate. It was very personal to me, because women of color, Black and brown women, are always at the bottom. They are the ones left behind, pushed behind, and labeled as other and not important enough to be included in dynamics of data. So it was very, very important to me to get them out there first. So we were putting together programs on wellness, oddly enough, catching a cold, the virus, or the flu before COVID. I remember, I think I caught the virus in January when Kobe died. And this was when they were labeling it upper respiratory infection. And I remember canceling an event because I had to go face to face and I didn't know what this thing was. Well, it wasn't until like a week later, once I felt better, I was convalescing about 10, 12 days. So it was, maybe 2 weeks later, I came back and I remember saying, I got to do a thing on wellness, because if this happens to me and I have to sit down, imagine what is happening to the pregnant women. No sooner than I did that, 3 weeks later, we're in the middle of COVID. And I remember the women telling me, Amina, that was right on time. And it wasn't like I did it, with some kind of osmosis. I did it because it happened to me. So one of the things that we're doing is advocating based on personal experiences. And we're making sure that all voices are heard in this to make sure we get the care that we need. And then we are who we've been waiting for. So that was a huge piece. I pulled a piece of Barack Obama in this, because we have to advocate for ourselves. I remember back in the days when we didn't have to go to doctors and hospitals and go to the police, and we handled things internally. And we kind of lost that over the years. I remember being raised by the block right there in Brooklyn, New York. And I remember having the woman down the street chastise me just as quick as my grandmother or my mother did. So we have to get back to that understanding that we have to protect each other. If you know somebody's sick, you're going to bring something to make them feel better. You're going to feed them, or you're going to give them a tincture or a salve, or something that's going to make them feel better. And we're going to get back to what we know as a community by doing things together. We don't need medicine to become healthy. We have to practice wellness. So we're educating, informing, and we're making sure that the communities are definitely in the front lines of the cure as they are with the illness.
Got to be our brothers and our sisters keeper. Dr. Amina Ali, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us here on Open. And certainly the information is there for people to be connected to. Keep doing the great work.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for allowing this conversation to happen.
No, thank you. All righty, Dr. Amina Ali, our guest here on Open. We want you to stay with us. We do have more show coming up right after this.
Who's most at risk for coronavirus? People over 65, people with underlying medical conditions like heart disease, chronic lung disease, asthma, diabetes, people undergoing cancer treatment, and people with weakened immune systems. What should you do if you or a loved one is at higher risk? Avoid close contact with people. Avoid crowds. Stay home if you can. Wash your hands frequently. Learn more ways to protect yourself and others at coronavirus.gov.
And welcome back here to Open. The COVID-19 phase has been pretty rough for people to deal with. And when we talk about the fear and anxiety of how to handle the stress that comes along with it, and possibly a second wave, it can overcome a lot of people. And so how can one actually reduce the stress and trauma during this time? Joining us now to tell us more is the founder and the president of Scudder Intervention Services Foundation. We're pleased to have Brett Scudder with us. And Brett, good to have you.
Good to be here, my brother. Good to be here. Good morning. Thank you.
No, good morning to you. And certainly when we talk about this, obviously a lot of people are still navigating from COVID-19. And I was looking at an article not too long ago talking about the recovery effort, that after one physically recovers, there's also the mental and the emotional recovery. And that's not just for the person that was actually infected, but even for those who were around. And so I don't think we've given a lot of, well, we have probably given some emphasis, but not as much as probably we should to mental health when it comes to COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very significant issue when you look at how scary this virus is and how many people have died from it. There are a lot of people who are so afraid of it that it has caused a big rift in our communities for families and friends who will say, look, I don't want anyone coming to my house. I don't want to be around people because I'm afraid of being infected. Or people who have been infected who have passed that on to other family members who are dealing with it. The psychological impacts have been tremendous. We just have been focused on the death, but not really the mental and psychological impacts of fear that a lot of people are feeling from the virus. And now that we're coming into the summertime and people are being, going out, more exposure, a lot of people not wearing masks, a lot of people are not safeguarding themselves. It's a heightened fear for a lot of people who are looking at it like, oh my God, this is going to increase the risk or spread of the virus. So there's a deep mental health impact of this that we're not looking at. And now that we're coming out of the heavy phase of death, people are starting to really take a breath and realize like, this is really a serious issue and we need to look at the impacts on a broader level.
Yeah. we talk about the impacts. Some of those impacts deal with depression. Another impact is actually suicide. Talk to us about depression and suicide and how that's played an important part in this whole thing that many people may not really be paying attention to.
Well, if you think about it, a lot of the depression that comes from it is out of the fear and the lockdown. So some of us have been locked down for 2, 3 months in our home in fear of just being out. That can be very depressive if someone is lonely and isolated, cut off from all their friends. But we're also seeing that in young children who no longer were able to go to school, who are not able to be socially active as they were. So it's a big issue across the board for depression and anxiety, and how that sometimes can force someone to feeling a sense of being overwhelmed, feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, and be like, you know what? I don't even care if I catch the virus or not. If it kills me, I'm happy that it kills me because I'm tired of living like this. And so we've heard those comments. We've heard people actually say that I'm not afraid of catching the virus because if it kills me, then that's a good thing. At least it would have solved the problems of what I've been going through. Or this fear that I keep hearing them talk about, there's no vaccine, there's no solution to it, and we may be going into a second phase.
Yeah.
So there's an overwhelming impact of too much news that's out there and too much information out there that's causing a lot of people to feel overwhelmed, anxious, and depressed from just all the negativity of this virus.
Walk me through walk me through a little bit about this. When we talk about overcoming depression, how does one overcome depression given the fact that this has been, this has very much been mind altering?
You know, depression is a word, but it's also an experience, right? And so that experience is something that people feel on different levels. And so while it's a word, we have to understand individually how people feel. So for example, you and I, right? We are both experiencing this virus and this pandemic and the lockdown from it, right? But we have reacted to it differently. So even if we're both depressed, your level of depression, maybe you're still able to function. Mine, maybe I'm shut down in my house in fear, living in my bedroom, in my bed, can't get out, I'm not eating, I'm not socializing or isolating myself. That situation right there is an unhealthy one, but we have to understand why people feel that way. It's because of the social anxiety, yes. So how do we get out of that? We got to check in. Daren, I'm going to call you. I'm going to check in with you and say, hey, brother, how are you feeling? How are you doing today? You're going to call me tomorrow. You're going to say, hey, Brett, how are you doing today? Let me encourage you. We encourage each other. Check in on people, not assuming that we know how they're feeling, but checking on them to see how they're feeling, giving them the opportunity to express how they're feeling the way they're feeling it, and not think that because the pandemic may be passing by, the death rates may be going down, that we think people are okay and people are dealing with that well. The problem we have right now, Daren, is that people are not being allowed to express how they're truly feeling. And until we know how they're truly feeling, like let them just kick, holler, scream, vent, and curse, we will never know how they're going to be recovering from this. The psychological impacts are going to be long-term trauma for a lot of people.
And I want to jump in here because when you talk about that psychological impact and long term, there's this thing called intergenerational trauma, and I wonder if
Yes.
you could speak to that for a minute.
So intergenerational trauma is trauma that has experienced from our ancestors coming up through time, that we continue holding on to the psychological impacts of that, how it has changed our behavior, how it has changed our mindset, how it has created fear in us in terms of fear of certain things. So if you look at right now, this pandemic, for example, asking ourselves, how is this pandemic for the next 2 or 3 generations going to impact our children and their children? As we look at the fact that millions of people's lives have been impacted, hundreds of thousands of people have died, and the fact that they're saying that this virus has altered or is even altering our DNA and our body structure. So when you look at the generational trauma that will come from this pandemic, we don't know how that's going to reflect on a lot of us as we go forward. We just know that right now it's important for us to deal with it right now, so it's not a generational crisis going forward. Because that's how generational trauma is perpetuated, is whenever we don't address the issues that we're facing or whatever events that traumatize us, we carry on and we pass it on to our children and our grandchildren and keep cycling it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Brett, thank you so much for sharing with us. I know it's a lot for us to really have to pay attention to during a time like this. And when we talk about the mental health component, it's something that's going to be playing out and people are going to be dealing with for some time. Brett Scudder, our guest here on Open. Thank you so much for joining us, Brett.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. Have a good day.
All righty. And listen, we want you to stay connected to us. We do have more Open. We're coming right back right after this.
Why should young people care about the spread of coronavirus? Well, we know that people with underlying medical conditions over the age of 60 are at highest risk, but they've got to get it from somebody.
So we're asking everyone to be selfless for others so that we can protect those who are most susceptible.
Not going to bars, not going to restaurants. It all just means physical separation so that you have a space between you and others.
For more information on how you can social distance, please go to coronavirus.gov.
And thank you for staying with us. The book I Am is an autobiographical collection of poetry shared to encourage and highlight the emotional healing of openly speaking up about painful experiences of sexual abuse, physical abuse, as well as the loss of loved ones. And here now to share a little bit more about it is the author of I Am, Amanda DeGeneste. And we thank you, Amanda, for being with us.
Thank you, Daren, for having me.
Great. And so as we talk about your book, obviously your book talks about some very real issues, emotional, sexual, and abuse. Give us a little bit about what was the impetus in you writing your book?
It was first to process what I had been through. I didn't realize, of course, it was something that was therapeutic for me. When I decided I was going to write it, my thoughts were, I needed to let it out, put it on paper and just get rid of it. But as I kept writing, I realized that it was going to help other people, other victims, process and start, if not continue, the healing of being abused sexually.
And when we talk about yourself, I mean, you know, I guess many people may not know that you had emotional sexual abuse coming up. A little bit about your story.
I was sexually abused as a child by my half-brother and a number of other people. Now, each time I went through the sexual abuse, it would really make me feel lost emotionally. I felt like I was going through this thing and I really didn't have anyone to talk to about it. That's what I felt like because it had never been spoken about to me. So I didn't know it was something that shouldn't be happening. I actually thought it was normal until one day my sister asked me, why did I lock the door? And I explained to her why. And her reaction was what told me that it was something that shouldn't have been happening.
And it took a minute. How long did it take you to realize, like, okay, you know this is happening, this is wrong, and really seeking help? Because that's a process, right? And getting help.
Yes, getting help. It takes a long time because sexual abuse and child sexual abuse, it's like taboo. And that's another reason why I wrote the book. I felt that we have to break that because that gives the abuser a blanket to cover under. If we're not talking about it, they feel safe to do this. And we need to talk about it.
Right. And when we talk about talking about it, there's a couple of facts that I know that you talked about. When you talk about protecting kids and keeping kids safe, it says, 95% of child molestation can be prevented. That's a fact for you.
All of the research that I've done shows that, in fact, if you teach children body safety and teach them that it's okay to call out their body parts and say no when they're uncomfortable, when people are doing something to them that makes them uncomfortable, it is definitely a preventive measure.
And talk about parents, right? Because you have parents and caregivers. It's important for parents and caregivers to like build that firewall, and that firewall to really prevent against the possibilities of molestation and abuse. What can parents do? I mean, you've had your experience. What advice would you pass on to parents and caregivers right now that maybe you can give them some assistance?
I would say starting from toddler's age, teach them what their body parts are. Teach them by the correct name, the buttocks, the nipples, and teach them that these are private parts of their body, their vagina, their penis, and let them know it's private. Let them know to tell you immediately if someone touches it and makes them uncomfortable or makes them touch their private parts. These are things parents need to talk about with their children. We teach our children how to cross the street, how to tie their shoelace. We teach them the eyes, the nose. We need to teach them body safety. Make them comfortable to talk about this from a young age so that they will know if someone touches their buttocks and they keep telling that person to stop, they need to tell mommy or daddy or that responsible adult right away.
Before we get into a poem that I know that you have, I want to ask about people who want to get connected to your book and how are they able to get their hands on your book?
They can go on to store.bookbaby.com and purchase the book. They can reach out to me on my website, i-am-anda.com, and I will be happy to send a copy. The book is available in most bookstores nationwide.
And so before we get out of here, I want to get an opportunity for you to share. I know that you have a special poem. So give us a little bit about the special poem that you wanted to share.
Yes, thank you. I would like the victims to know that they're not alone and they need to choose them. Choose yourself when it comes to the healing. This poem is titled Free, I Choose Me. I will not allow you to take my balance, not spiritually, physically, nor emotionally. My balance is my core. It tells me my purpose. I am here to love me. So within me, my balance I do store. You took from me that which you had no right. Now I get to tell of all the evil you did almost every night. And now replenished with wholesome thoughts, strength, and a smile on my face, I write to be rid of you and free myself of your disgrace. Before you seemed so big and scary, now I pity you. And your existence to me, as I put pen to paper, diminishes through me telling my story. You have to tell the story in order to start the healing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, and hopefully people get connected to your book. Definitely a conversation that we need to continue in terms of protecting our children, keeping them safe. But thank you for using your voice and, sharing with others your experience, because it's definitely making a difference in others' lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Daren.
Oh, great having you. Listen, now, before we go to break, if you want more information, don't forget to visit our website, iamanda.com. We are taking a quick break. We do have more show. Want you to stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.
Thank you.
And welcome back here to Open. Daren, Jaime here with you. Well, Rethink Food NYC is a not-for-profit organization that is actually utilizing food waste from restaurants, grocery stores, and corporate kitchens to create new and nutritious meals for those who actually are in need. Rethink has also set up emergency food response, setting up to assist people with food needs and access during the times of crisis. And joining us now to talk a little bit more about Rethink is CEO and co-founder of Rethink Food, Matt Joswiak, and we thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. How are you doing?
Doing well, bro. Doing wonderful and great. And really, you're doing some great work in filling and bridging the gap. I think I remember my mom always talking about don't leave any food out there. But the reality is you take food that is gone unused and you take it and you turn it around and use it to be a blessing to New York City residents.
That's right. Yeah, we spent a lot of time trying to get that done with getting restaurants, because there's so much excess food at the end of the night. When the new products come in, they just don't have space for the old products, so they get rid of them. It's been a long time, but now we just have restaurants kind of doing the work for us, and it's made everything a lot easier.
So walk us through exactly what happened. So, it's the end of the night, the end of the shift, and then all of a sudden the restaurants are about to close up, but they have some unused food. Walk us through what happens.
Well, yeah, it's that like in the legacy model pre-COVID, that's kind of where we were. But like it's a little, people kind of think it's like leftovers or stuff like that, but it's really not. There's a certain amount of inventory the restaurant has to have in-house to make sure that they can feed the amount of people that are coming in the door. So they always prepare for like 150 people to come in, and then like sometimes 80 people come in, sometimes whatever. So they take that and they just box it up really nicely for us so that we pick it up. But it's some of the most beautiful food I've ever seen, because it's restaurant quality ingredients where there's new stuff coming in there. So you get beautiful asparagus, spinach, herbs, like fresh produce, never been touched. And you get some of like the best chefs in the city making sauces for you, right? So like sorrel spinach puree, potato puree, like all these great sauces, tomato sauce and all this stuff. And then they just give it to us, and then we're able to kind of put it together in a beautiful way and cater community organizations around the city. But since COVID, there's no restaurants. So right. Restaurants weren't open, so we couldn't do that. So now we've just been asking restaurants to make food for their communities. And they've been so inspired and so into it that they want to keep doing it post-COVID and forever, which we are really excited about.
Yeah, it's a wonderful partnership that you're actually able to create that with restaurants. How hard was it to get restaurant buy-in?
Well, it wasn't that hard, because we were some of the only people buying food from restaurants. So when we told restaurants we were going to help you stay afloat for 12 weeks, pay about $4,000 a week, they were super excited to get on board. So no, they were great. Restaurants were really collaborative, and it's been just a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Not only have you provided food for the community, you've also been instrumental in providing food for Black Lives Matter protesters.
Yeah. Well, that was just like, especially in the Bronx, like we were just like, we're pretty simple over here. We don't not a lot of, myself, I don't like a lot. I was just like, there's people out there that don't have masks, and, there's no place to get food around here. Like, where are people eating? Where are they getting a bottle of water? So we just went with the truck and handled out bottled waters, a meal, a mask, and just so people could stay safe and they could get a refreshment while they were, doing what they do.
Yeah. Well, we're in the process of phasing up here in New York City. So talk to us about how do you see things playing out for yourself going forward in the future now that we're starting to phase up?
I think that, the restaurants are going to produce less food, but like community restaurants, like there's a lot of especially like La Mirada in the Bronx is a great example for us. Like they can do a lot with that extra revenue. So like it coming into their business. So we just want to keep getting money and business into those restaurants, so they can keep feeding their community. We found this a lot in East New York. A lot of the restaurants we worked with in East New York had been catering community centers for years, but just not getting paid for it. So what we used to do before at Rethink was cater community centers, but they've been doing it for the last 5-6 years, whether it's in like a Sunday after mass kind of brunch style or whatever it is. So now we're just gonna, instead of doing it all ourselves, we're just going to pay them to do it, keep the money, get the jobs going, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to try to use philanthropy to spread equity.
And speaking of philanthropy, I know that you gave about $40,000 for people to stay open to help feed people who are in need.
Yeah, well, actually, we went a lot higher than that because we realized they needed more. So, like some of them, like in collective fare, up around $100,000. Like we wanted to get money into these communities, these people who are just doing the right thing. So it's been just the most exciting. It's been the exciting time of my life for sure.
Yeah. And with all that's been going on, I mean, obviously the future of the food industry is certainly in question. We're going to be eating, but for the timing, it's going to be a little bit different. So give us your take.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think it's ever going to be the way it was. I don't think that's a possibility. And I think that restaurants, at least for me, I started as a dishwasher in Kansas and kind of worked my way up. Restaurants are community centers. It's where you meet your family. They have events there. If you want to go work there, you can learn a skill. A lot of people learn a language there. They're really wonderful places that have done a lot for the community. And what we're trying to do is treat them that way. Treat them with the respect, restaurants with the respect that they deserve by using these government sources, the corporate sources, the philanthropy sources, are all trying to pay people to do job training programs, language skills, community building, nutritious food. It's just everything a restaurant does. So we're just trying to use those same sources of revenue and put them directly into restaurants because we feel like they're a great vehicle for success.
Yeah. And so for people who want to get connected, what exactly do they do?
You follow us on Instagram. That's where our most current news is, at rethinkfood.nyc, or go to rethinkfood.nyc to just visit and see what we're up to.
That's great. And Matt, certainly, I mean, you're helping people out all across the board. I think that, in a time like this, we need a lot of people who are volunteering and have boots on the ground to make a difference. And you're certainly making a difference. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah. And before we leave, is there anything else you want people to know?
Stay positive, stay happy. It's going to be all right.
Yeah. That's right. Well, thank you so much, Matt Joswiak, our guest here on Open. Thanking him for joining us and the work that Rethink is doing in helping out to be a blessing to so many people across New York City who really stand in need, especially during times like this. And for restaurants who are challenged, for them to continue to open their doors and to continue to be a help to our New York City residents is a great thing. Matt, thanks again. All right, everybody. Well, that about wraps it up for today's episode of Open. I am Daren Jaime. Of course, we thank you for watching. Now, if you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the Recablecast. And then also, you can also check us out on the web at www.bronxnet.org. For all of us here at Open, I am Daren Jaime saying take care, God bless. Listen, Rita Valentine will be back with a brand new, fresh episode of Open on Friday. Until then, take care and stay safe, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.